Hello, my name is Jacob Johnson, and I am a student at North Carolina Central University. Thank you for joining me today for my presentation entitled Spirituality and Sexuality, an exploration of a Black cultural experience and how it may impact attitudes toward premarital sex. Historically, African American churches have shaped religious and cultural identities within Black communities in the United States. African American religious cultures became a reflection of the Black cultural experience in the U.S. and first emerged as American slavery disrupted connections to African cultural and ancient religious traditions. At the beginning of the 18th century, African Americans began embracing Christianity and formed independent church communities and larger denominational structures which served as arenas for spiritual support, political activism, educational opportunity, and economic development. In her essay entitled Religion in African American History, Judith Weisenfeld explained that Black religious institutions served as the context from which African Americans derived meaning of the experience of slavery, interpreted their relationship to Africa, and charted a vision for the collective future. Wade Boykin and Forrest Toms, in developing a conceptual framework for Black child socialization, identified spirituality as one of 9 distinct dimensions that find expression among African Americans. The sermons that take place within African American churches are of particular significance as they also correspond to the Boykin and Toms dimension of orality, breathing relevancy into what is believed to be the Word of God. Other dimensions that are interrelated within the context of Black churches include harmony and communalism. Sexuality is an aspect of psychosocial development that first arises during adolescence, and the process of sexual socialization plays a prominent role in the formation of positive or negative attitudes toward sexuality. It is normal for adolescents to experience sexual desire, but whether or not they choose to act upon these desires is influenced by their sexual socialization. Christianity condemns premarital sex as a sinful act. Considering the significance of Black churches within the tapestry of the Black cultural experience, it is reasonable to deduce that the messages, particularly from sermons, are very influential in shaping attitudes toward premarital sex, especially if the message is part of one's sexual socialization. And thus we arrive at my hypothesis. Children who listen to sermons at a Black church throughout their childhood will develop negative attitudes toward premarital sex. In order to investigate my hypothesis, I conducted a single case study, a semi-structured qualitative interview with a Black adolescent whom I will refer to as Sean, who grew up listening to sermons at a Black church. We met at a diner on the evening of Thursday, March 12, 2020, and he was accompanied by his mother throughout the duration of the interview, which lasted just under 50 minutes. I wanted to learn about Sean's experiences attending a Black church, listening to sermons throughout his childhood, and how these experiences may have impacted his current attitudes toward premarital sex. I asked him questions like, why do you go to church? What does it mean to be a religious person? Can you describe your relationship with God? Does your pastor ever have teachings that relate to romantic relationships? And then dialed in my questions toward the end of the interview, asking, what does your church teach you about premarital sex? How is abstinence discussed? And finally, what are your personal thoughts on sex before marriage? Please allow me to provide a little bit of background on the subject of my interview, Sean. Sean is a 14-year-old Black male from Durham, North Carolina. He lives with his married mother and father, and he's an only child. Outside of school, he spends the majority of his time with his mother, with whom he is reportedly very close. He is very active within his church, frequently participating in church events, as well as attending Sunday services with his mother. He reported having many friends that attend his church. He even serves his church as the head of the media department, overseeing the church's Facebook page. Sean has been attending his current church for 3 years, having previously attended another church throughout his childhood, and he genuinely enjoys being a part of his church community. He describes his current church as huge, with a majority African American congregation and a Pentecostal denomination. Sean identified his current pastor as being particularly influential in his life, stating, "It's just something about him that connects with me. I like to talk to him and I feel comfortable around him." Sean's favorite part of the Sunday service is the sermon. He aspires to become a pastor himself when he is grown and pays close attention to each sermon so that he may one day incorporate things that resonate with him into his own sermons one day. Sean enjoys interacting with members of his church outside of church services, explaining that his interactions with the other congregants make him feel good inside. It is important to Sean that his friends and family share his belief in God because it allows them to be more in harmony, stating, "If you're going through something, then you can connect with a friend or loved one and be like, 'Hey, I need you to pray over me or help me with this,' unlike a person who does not believe at all. They wouldn't really connect with you. They don't know your belief, because you don't believe it, but I do." He smiled enthusiastically throughout the interview when discussing his faith and relationship with God. It was apparent throughout the interview that Sean's experiences within his church have fostered his spiritual and cultural identity and clearly exemplify several dimensions of Black child socialization that were put forth by Boykin and Toms that I mentioned earlier. Sean's spirituality is the basis for his most valued connections with others, and he reportedly experiences harmony in his relationships with others when they share his spiritual beliefs, allowing him to trust in the good of their intentions. Pertaining to the dimension of communalism, Sean relishes the fellowship opportunities that his church provides, especially his involvement with the church media department and community outreach. His citation of sermons as being his favorite part of Sunday services is a reflection of the dimension of orality, as he is so impacted by the power of his pastor's sermons that he was inspired to pursue becoming a pastor himself. His church's various community outreach events are characteristic of Pentecostal Black megachurches, focusing on community development and sponsoring social services. For instance, Sean told me about his church inviting the surrounding community into the church for haircuts. Sean appeared noticeably less comfortable as the interview transitioned into questions regarding relationships, especially sex, crossing his arms tightly and exhibiting a discernibly stiffer posture. He was quick to clarify to me that his girlfriend is a friend girl when asked if he feels as though he's ready to date, he replied, "Not yet." Sean described his ideal romantic partner as being loving, caring, and outgoing. Someone that will help you along the way and not give up on you so easily. This illustrated a consistent theme of commitment that he associates with marriage and sexual relationships. Though he does not presently give much thought to marriage, he expressed what he believed to be the best part of marriage as not giving up on each other, to love each other and cherish each other. When asked directly how he feels about premarital sex, he responded, "I don't think you're supposed to, but some people do." Later elaborating, "I think you should be married before, because, well, if you're married, then you're committed." While sexual desire is considered to be a normal part of the adolescent experience, Sean did not appear eager to engage in sexual behavior. He did not report encountering any of the negative consequences of refraining from sexual activity that Brady and Halpern in their 2008 study identified and screened for in their study, which included consequence items like developing a bad reputation and feeling left out. Their findings from that study showed that negative consequences, specifically having a bad reputation and feeling regret as a result of refraining from sex, increased over time. However, they also found that adolescents that remained abstinent throughout the study were more likely to report having only experienced positive consequences related to their abstinence. Interestingly, Brady and Halpern, in that 2008 study, noted that boys experience less pressure from their female partners to engage in sexual activity. Sean did not report feeling any pressure from his girlfriend to engage in sexual behavior and did not indicate any fear of negative consequences related to his resolve to remain abstinent. In reviewing the interview with Sean, his responses appear to support my hypothesis that children who listen to sermons at a black church throughout their childhood will indeed develop negative attitudes toward premarital sex. Sean stated that he thinks that his church's teachings have influenced his attitudes related to premarital sex. He identified his mom and his favorite pastor as being two impactful and influential figures in his life, and his relationship with them seems to strengthen his attitudes about premarital sex and his resolve to refrain from sex until marriage, recalling his church's message of abstinence. It's worth noting that Sean's mother, who was present throughout the interview, had previously expressed to him her opposition to premarital sex, which may have prompted him to alter his candor. Though his mother's impact upon the formation of his negative attitudes regarding premarital sex was likely prominent, it does not wholly discount my hypothesis that he developed said negative attitudes subsequent to listening to sermons at a black church throughout his childhood. Though Sean initially responded that he wouldn't say so much when asked if it was important to him that his present or future partner have similar religious values to his own, in the same breath he stated, "But at least believe, and if you don't believe all the way, let me help you." He also divulged that his present girlfriend is religious, and her religious values are similar to his own, which reinforced a point he'd made earlier regarding the perceived harmony that shared spiritual beliefs bring to interactions within the context of a relationship. Sean confirmed that premarital sex is incorporated within the teachings at his church, stating, in reference to his church's discussion of abstinence, "Unless you're about to get married to your mate, there's no need. But if you're married, then yeah." He candidly responded, "Nope," when asked if he felt like teenagers pay attention to his church's teachings, which I found to be curious because when he described a conversation he'd had with his friends about premarital sex, it sounded as though his friends shared his negative attitudes, characterizing sex as relegated to later on in life, and bemoaning what they anticipated their respective parents' reactions would be. One of my friends said if my mom ever found out, or my dad ever found out about that, I would have to skip town. Sean recalled responding to his friend, "I would probably do the same thing with my parents." He confirmed that his family talks about the teachings of the Bible that pertain to sex, stating, "Mom does remind that, it's not a bad thing, but it's not a thing that you would do right now, especially not right now." Again, it's difficult to confidently state that his responses were entirely forthright, with his mother present and his body language indicating his discomfort when discussing sex in front of her. I noticed that he elaborated noticeably less in his responses to questions about sex, and his posture was rigid, as I noted earlier. As was apparent with Sean, research has shown that religiosity tends to be associated with more conservative attitudes toward premarital sex. Among the emotions that Garceau and Ronis, in their 2017 study, identified to be associated with initial sexual behavior by their participants who were raised within a religious context were guilt, fear, frustration, and resentment, even if they reported the actual sexual experience to have been neutral or positive. It's abundantly clear that adolescents will inevitably come to a crossroads where their own sexual curiosity and desires meet and perhaps conflict with their religion's view of premarital sexual behavior as sinful. And as a result, if they succumb to their desires, they may be overcome with guilt and fear that they've committed a sin. However, it does not appear that Sean has yet to reach such a crossroads. Interestingly, and in opposition to Garceau and Ronis's 2017 research study findings that adolescents who are raised in a religious context associate fear and guilt with premarital sex, Sean actually appears to embrace abstinence, not because it is sinful or runs counter to his church's teachings, but primarily because he associates sexual behavior with commitment. Thus, it is only appropriate within the context of marriage. Of course, Sean's attitudes toward premarital sex may very well change, as Brady and Halpern observed in their 2008 study. However, Garceau and Ronis, in their study, referenced a previous study that had found that young, highly religious, married couples were significantly less likely to have engaged in premarital sex than their less religious counterparts. So Sean may indeed continue to embrace his negative attitudes regarding premarital sex, especially if he maintains his aspiration to become a pastor. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for your time today. Please be well and stay safe. If you find that your interest was piqued throughout my presentation by the topics discussed, please feel free to explore the references. I used each of these references in compiling the information for my presentation. Thank you again. Have a great day.